So in order for us to begin sending requests from a web server to a database, we're going to need to know a few basics about what is required in the communication protocol of the internet. This is known as TCP IP. Let's recall what we've already went over, which is that the client and server use some sort of common language or communication protocol for communicating with one another. The particular one that we're interested in is TCP IP. Postgres, which is a relational database system that is designed for use on the web, follows a client-server model that supports TCP IP for communication. This is because TCP IP allows us to send communications over networks that support it, which include the internet. This isn't a computer networking course where we'll necessarily get into the weeds of how packets of information are sent over the web, but we will link you to a resource that gives you a 5-minute brief overview of how the internet works, generally speaking. Go ahead and take a look at this video in order to understand and get good foundations for how communication happens over a network. Several things that are useful for us to know is that TCP IP uses two things, IP addresses and ports, in order to send communications back and forth between clients and servers on TCP IP networks. This works very similarly to the US Postal Office. Let's say that you're trying to send mail from one address to another. In order to send mail, you're going to need to know both your address as well as the address of other people that you're sending to. The people in this case here are computers, and the location of those computers are also known as addresses. They're known as IP addresses in particular. Sometimes a particular computer can receive a lot of different communications. So you're not only going to need one mailbox, you're going to need multiple mailboxes. Anything that receives a lot of traffic will require multiple ports. Much like an airport that receives multiple planes at once, you need every plane to be able to be routed to its own individual port. In the context of a computer, a port is tied to some physical location that exists on the computer's motherboard. Ports are numbered, and different ports tend to serve different types of traffic, and they're designed and optimized for different types of traffic. Two really important port numbers to know are port 80 and port 5432. Port 80 is typically responsible for HTTP requests that come in from the web. When a web client sends traffic to a web server, say by submitting a form or clicking on a product item, it is typically sending information to the web server's IP address located on port 80. Now, for a web server to communicate to a database, typically that's done through port 5432. 5432 is the port that most database systems listen on to receive traffic and also send back information to their clients. 5432 is also the default port for Postgres, which we'll be using in this course. So to summarize, the suite of protocols that the internet uses for communication is called TCP IP. TCP IP uses two things in order to send communications. One is the IP address of the location of the computers that you are sending traffic to and from. Second is the ports that you're using in order to send traffic on a particular host computer. We need to know both the IP address as well as the port in order to establish a connection from one computer to another. In particular, we'll need to know the IP address and port every time we establish a connection from a client web server to a backend database.